Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The first time Dad let me sit in the driver's seat of the Mustang, I was 8 years old. My feet didn't reach the pedals, and the leather burned my thighs through my shorts. But I still remember the way the steering wheel felt wide, firm, serious, like it was holding something more than just the mechanics of driving. My dad leaned against the hood with his arms crossed, squinting at me with that half smile of his, the kind that always meant he was both proud and amused. "That's gonna be yours one day, Lore," he said, like it was a fact. Like saying the sun would rise tomorrow. I believed him. For the next 30-something years, I never questioned it. That car wasn't just a car. It was our thing. Some dads tossed a ball around with their kids. Mine handed me a wrench and showed me how to bleed brakes. Every Sunday afternoon, it was me and him in the garage, me handing tools, him swearing at bolts. Classic rock humming from an old radio in the corner. It smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and cigarettes he thought I didn't know he still smoked. But I knew everything. That Mustang, candy apple red, black racing stripes, a '69 fastback with a rebuilt 302, and an aftermarket dual exhaust, was the only consistent thing in my life growing up. When my mom got sick and stopped being able to do more than sleep and cry, Dad and I just worked more on the car. When I got my first boyfriend and he ghosted me after I said no to prom night sex, I curled up on the back seat of that Mustang, sobbing until my dad came out and sat beside me without saying a word. When I moved out at 19, chasing some version of independence that turned out to be just a string of overpriced apartments and underpaid jobs, I still came back to that car every other Sunday. And every time, without fail, Dad would slap the hood and say, "Still yours when I'm gone, kiddo." Except he didn't wait until he was gone. Last Sunday, we were all having brunch at Katie's place. My younger sister, the family's little sparkler. Everything in her life was covered in glitter, literally. The napkins at brunch had tiny golden flecks embedded in them that made my coffee look like it had been sprinkled with fairy dust. Her house was one of those suburban, open floor plan types. All white cabinets and wine racks and live, laugh, love bullshit on the walls. Katie looked perfect, of course. Hair curled, fake lashes, that little laugh she does where she puts her hand on your arm like she really cares. Her husband, Brent, a human pair of khaki pants, was flipping bacon on the griddle while their twins screamed over who got more syrup. I'd brought a bottle of real maple syrup, the good stuff from Vermont, because I know Katie always buys the high fructose garbage. But no one noticed. No one ever notices when I do things. Dad showed up late, of course, in a button-down that still had a dry cleaning tag hanging from the armpit. And the moment he walked in, Katie shrieked, "Dad!" and ran to hug him like she hadn't just seen him 3 days ago. I stood up, smiled, and poured him a cup of black coffee without asking, because I know how he takes it. We were halfway through brunch when he stood up, clinked a spoon against his glass, and said, "I've got an announcement." The room went quiet. Even the twins stopped fighting for a second. Katie tilted her head and beamed like she was already in on it. Dad cleared his throat, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out a key ring. I recognized it instantly. There was only one leather tag like that, worn and faded with a patch of duct tape wrapped around the edge. He held it up like it was a goddamn Oscar. "Katie," he said, "I want you to have the Mustang." I didn't hear what she said next. There was a high-pitched buzzing in my ears, like when someone slaps you in the face and the pain hasn't even hit yet. Everyone started clapping, even Brent, like this was some sweet, emotional Hallmark moment. I felt someone's hand on my shoulder. I think it was Dad's. And then he said the part that really made something in my chest go dark and still. "You're too busy to appreciate things like this anyway." I smiled, nodded, even clapped. Katie jumped up and down, her acrylic nails clicking as she hugged him, holding those keys like she'd won the damn lottery. And maybe she had. That car was worth more than 70 grand in mint condition, and Dad had kept it pristine. But it wasn't about the money, not for me. It never was. I looked at Katie, glowing like a bride, then looked at my dad. He didn't even meet my eyes. That's the thing about being the dependable daughter, the one who never needed bailing out, never crashed a car, never got caught sneaking boys in after curfew. People start assuming you don't need much of anything at all, that you don't care, that you're just fine. But I'm not made of stone, and that car was never just a car. They went back to laughing and eating like nothing had happened. I took a bite of cold eggs and sipped my coffee, now bitter and lukewarm. I listened to Katie talk about how she was going to totally redo the interior and maybe wrap it in matte black, because red wasn't her color. Dad didn't say a word. The brunch went on another hour. I made jokes, helped clean up, even gave Katie a ride to pick up her own car afterward since she'd left it at Dad's. She hugged me at the curb, told me I was so chill, and that she hoped I'd get my own classic car someday. I smiled and waved goodbye. And then I pulled out my phone and texted a number I'd saved for months. The reply came back within minutes. Sunday, 9 a.m., bring paperwork. They thought I was quiet because I was being gracious. What they didn't know was I already owned the land under the car. My sister Katie has always had this strange magnetic effect on people, like she exists in some softer, shinier version of reality. One where doors open without keys and people forgive things before they even happen. She was born with a laugh that made adults melt and teachers make excuses. I don't say that out of jealousy, at least not the petty kind. It's just the truth. I've watched grown men argue with her and walk away thinking it was their idea to back down. She has that thing, whatever it is, that makes people hand her things, jobs, apartments, second chances, or in this case, a Mustang. Growing up, the difference between us wasn't something you could put your finger on easily. We both had the same dark hair, though hers had a wave that mine never managed. We had the same dad, same mom, same public school, same chipped ceramic cereal bowls every morning. But where I got praise for being mature for my age, Katie got praise for her smile, for her laugh, for her ability to light up a room. I was the planner, the list maker, the homework doer. Katie was the one who forgot her backpack and somehow still got a gold star. I used to think it was just our personalities, like maybe some people are just easier to love. But the older I got, the more I noticed the tilt of the playing field. The time Dad forgot to come to my band concert because Katie had a sore throat. The way he looked at her with that warm, amused pride while he looked at me with something closer to respect, or worse, expectation. I wasn't his soft spot. I was his mirror, something to measure himself against. When we were teenagers, Katie totaled her first car backing out of our driveway while texting. She was 17, the car had been less than a year old, and she cried so hard in the kitchen that night, I thought she was going to throw up. I was standing at the sink, rinsing off dishes because no one else was going to do them, and I watched Dad go from furious to gentle in under 5 seconds. He pulled her into his chest, stroked her hair, and said it was just a thing. We can replace things, baby. You're okay. That's what matters. The next morning, there was already talk of leasing something newer. When I dinged my bumper parking too close to a fire hydrant in college, barely a scratch, no one else involved. Dad didn't even ask if I was okay. He just said, "You should know better by now," and hung up. I paid to fix it myself. I didn't tell anyone, but I worked weekends at a laundromat for 2 months to cover it. When I finally came home that Christmas, Katie had a new puppy and a newer car, and Dad asked me if I'd thought about finding a more stable career path. I was 21. I hadn't even finished school. I used to tell myself that he was harder on me because he saw potential, that some part of him believed I could handle more, do more, be more. But over time, that kind of narrative turns brittle. You start realizing that being the one who can carry more just means you get handed heavier loads. No one asks if your back hurts. The last real conversation I had with my mom before she passed was in the hallway outside her bedroom. She had just come back from chemo, her skin pale and papery. I was trying to get her to eat half a banana, and she looked at me, tired, grateful, and almost amused. "You're always the one who keeps things moving, aren't you?" she said, her voice thin but clear. I smiled, shrugged. Someone's got to. She took my hand and held it in both of hers, her fingers cool and bony. "You'll always have to be the bigger person, Lauren," she said. "That's the kind of soul you have. I wish it didn't have to be you, but you'll survive better than she will." She didn't say my sister's name, but we both knew who she meant. After Mom died, everything shifted even more. Katie moved back home for 6 months, ostensibly to help Dad, but really to recover from a breakup with some bartender in Nashville. I was living in a 1-bedroom and working 2 jobs, but Dad called her his rock. She'd bring him takeout and binge-watch shows with him while I was paying their past-due electricity bill without telling either of them. He called me a godsend in passing once, over the phone, like I was an app that had fixed itself. But Katie was the one who got taken out for steak dinners to cheer her up. So when he handed her the keys to that car last Sunday and said, "You're fun," I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. Not because I didn't expect it, but because some part of me, the same one that believed in Santa way too long, still thought maybe, just maybe, he'd remember who had actually earned it. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, but I did listen. Because here's the thing, a week before that brunch, I'd gone by Dad's place to drop off a battery charger he'd left at mine. I walked into the garage and heard him on the phone, his voice muffled but still distinct. He was talking to Katie. "She's too serious. She doesn't get what the car means. You do, honey. You're fun." He laughed, that warm chuckle that used to be just for me. "She's got her work and her tight schedule. She wouldn't even enjoy it. You? You'll drive it with the windows down and the music up. That's how it should be." I didn't say anything. I just backed out of the garage and went home. That night, I made a call. It was to a number I'd had saved in my phone for almost 3 years, since the day I bought the small commercial lot behind the old hardware store on East Pine. It was nothing fancy, just gravel and some weeds, but Dad had parked the Mustang there for decades. He'd been using it since the early 90s, back when it was owned by the city. He never noticed when the ownership changed hands. I bought it quietly through a trust, after the city auctioned off a bunch of dead lots to clear tax liens. It cost me less than a used Honda. He never asked. I never told him. Until now, it hadn't mattered. I didn't want to take anything from him. I just wanted to protect the memory of that car. The way it was, untarnished. But the moment he handed those keys to Katie like it was some last-minute birthday present, something changed in me. Not anger, not spite, clarity. He saw me as the ghost. The reliable one, the one who doesn't need things. So I decided to do what ghosts do best. I would haunt them, quietly, precisely, and without warning. Sunday, 9 in the morning, tow scheduled, deed in hand. All I had to do was wait. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing the weight of a secret that could turn a room full of smiles into stunned silence. Not the malicious kind of satisfaction. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about balance. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted for once to be seen, to feel the world tilt slightly back in my direction after spending years walking uphill while pretending it was flat ground. After brunch, after the shock of my father's announcement and the manufactured sparkle in Katie's eyes, I drove home in silence, both hands on the wheel like I was bracing for impact. The worst part about that afternoon wasn't the key toss or even the excuse about me being too busy to appreciate things. No, it was the way he said it, so casually as though he'd been building that opinion in private for years, and finally decided it was safe enough to say out loud. It wasn't meant as an insult. It was worse. It was said with conviction, finality, the kind of judgment someone believes they're entitled to make because they've watched you from a distance and decided they know the whole story. When I got home, I poured myself a drink, not out of habit, but out of ritual. Bourbon, no ice, in a heavy glass that still smelled faintly of oak. The first sip burned a little less than I hoped. I sat down at the small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the deed. Parcel number 04-928, Lot 38. Zoning code C2, mixed commercial. That patch of land had sat under Dad's car for the better part of 30 years. He'd first used it back when it belonged to the city, a leftover wedge of gravel between an old appliance repair shop and an empty alley. He used to say he preferred parking the Mustang there because the garage was too dusty, but even back then, I knew it was about visibility. He wanted people to see it. The Mustang wasn't just a car to him, it was a symbol, a conversation starter, something that let him pretend, even in his 60s, that he still had a little fire under the hood. When the city offloaded surplus lots a few years back, I stumbled across the auction purely by accident. I was scrolling through municipal listings at work, helping a client who needed to check zoning restrictions for a renovation permit, when I noticed the address. Something about it made my heart kick. I didn't even tell anyone, not my boyfriend at the time, not my friends, and certainly not my family. I followed the steps, filed the paperwork under a trust name, paid the fee, and received the title in the mail 3 weeks later. I stored it in a fireproof boxing tucked behind a stack of old tax returns, and didn't touch it again until that Sunday afternoon when Katie got the car. People like to pretend revenge is a sudden impulse, some flash of rage that turns into action. But the truth is, the most effective revenge comes from discipline, from patience, from an understanding of how power works. Not the flashy kind that screams, but the quiet kind that waits in the corner until everyone forgets it's there. I wasn't going to slash tires or yell in anyone's face. That's not who I am. My version of rebalancing the scales was quieter, legal, surgical. The towing company I chose wasn't one of those rusty, crooked outfits with oil-stained drivers and bad Yelp reviews. I hired a boutique service that handled classic car transport, the kind with padded slings and enclosed trailers. I wasn't about to let that car get scratched, even if I wasn't the one driving it anymore. That's the part that would probably confuse most people. I still love that car. I loved it so much I wasn't going to let Katie treat it like another one of her trophies, another accessory for Instagram and brunches and boomerang videos. I scheduled the tow for Sunday at 9 in the morning, precisely 1 hour after Katie typically arrived for family brunch. Dad had started making Sunday brunch a tradition a few years back, a way to keep the family close, as he put it. What he really meant was that it was a time when he could hold court, pass down his recycled wisdom, and bask in the glow of being adored by at least one of his daughters. I rarely went. Work usually got in the way, and Katie had a way of monopolizing the room. But that week, I confirmed I'd be there. I brought croissants from a local French bakery, the kind Dad used to rave about back when we'd spend Saturdays together running errands. I figured if I was going to be part of the show, I might as well bring props. The tow operator's name was Franklin, middle-aged, polite, all business. When I called him, I gave him the lot number, the vehicle description, and a brief explanation of the situation, legally speaking. I told him I owned the land, the car was there without authorization, and I had the paperwork to prove it. He didn't ask questions, just said, "We've done this before, ma'am. You'll get a confirmation text the morning of." Saturday night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious about the fallout. Oddly, I wasn't. It was something else, a feeling I hadn't expected. Sadness, maybe, or something more complicated. This wasn't just about the car. It was about everything that car represented. The memories, the promises, the years I spent believing I mattered just as much as my sister did, even if no one said it out loud. I thought of my dad's hands tightening lug nuts, his voice humming along to CCR on the radio. The way he used to hand me a dirty rag and say, "You're not afraid to get your hands dirty. That's good. Most people are." I didn't realize he'd stopped seeing that girl, the one who stood beside him in the garage, as someone worthy of the same loyalty he gave Katie. Somewhere along the way, I became just another adult in his life, someone he could sideline with the excuse that I'd outgrown sentimentality. But I hadn't. I'd just gotten quieter about it. By morning, the sky was heavy with low clouds, the kind that make everything feel suspended in gray. I dressed plainly, dark jeans, a black sweater, flats. I didn't want to look like I was making a statement. I wanted to be invisible until the moment I wasn't. I arrived at Katie's house 10 minutes before the truck. The Mustang was parked out front, gleaming. She'd had it detailed. The chrome sparkled and the windshield was spotless. It looked like it didn't belong in the driveway of a home decorated with neon pink planters and bless this mess welcome mats. Inside, everyone was already gathered. Dad was stirring eggs, Katie was laughing at something on her phone, and Brent gave me that half nod he always used when he didn't know what to say. I handed off the croissants, poured myself some coffee, and sat down. The first 10 minutes went by like nothing was different. I asked about work, I complimented the twins' new haircuts, I even laughed at something Brent said, though I can't remember what it was. And then I heard it. The low growl of a diesel engine pulling up outside. I checked my phone. Franklin, we're here. I took one final sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully, and stood up. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. If anything, I felt calm, collected, ready. "Excuse me," I said, already walking toward the front door. "I need to step outside for a moment." They didn't suspect a thing. Not yet. When I stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was the sound. The tow truck's hydraulic platform hissed softly as it lowered toward the curb. The smooth, deliberate movement of machinery, doing exactly what it was built for, without hesitation, without question, and without any of the emotional complexity that had filled my chest for weeks. Franklin stood beside the truck, clipboard in hand, eyes focused, not smiling but not grim either. He looked like a man who had learned how to do uncomfortable jobs without making them personal, and that was exactly what I needed. I walked toward him slowly, my boots pressing into the decorative stone Katie had landscaped along her front walkway, the ones she'd complained about costing almost more than the goddamn mulch, as if such decisions weighed heavily on her daily existence. I handed him the documents, the deed, the copy of the zoning map, and the photo of the Mustang taken just hours earlier. Clearly situated on my lot. Franklin glanced through the pages with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times before. He nodded once, then walked back to the truck and began the process of positioning the straps. The Mustang sat gleaming in the morning light, its hood slightly fogged over from the chill, a faint trail of condensation slipping down the windshield like a tear. The car didn't deserve any of this, but then again, neither did I. Inside the house, I could hear the low murmur of voices, the clatter of cutlery on plates, the background noise of a family pretending everything was fine. I waited until the first strap tightened around the front axle, just enough to make it clear that this wasn't a simple service call. And then I opened the front door and called out, as casually as if I were announcing fresh coffee. "Hey, Katie, you might want to come out here." Her response was immediate. Footsteps, a giggle, some vague question shouted behind her. "What, is it a raccoon or something?" She came around the corner holding her phone, eyes still on the screen, clearly mid-scroll. But when she looked up and saw the tow truck, the laughter died in her throat. Her expression shifted in stages. First confusion, then amusement, and finally a kind of dawning horror that settled in her features like a fog. "What the hell is going on?" she said, her voice louder than it needed to be, drawing the attention of everyone still inside. A second later, Dad appeared behind her, his eyebrows pulled together, already irritated. Brent came next, holding one of the twins on his hip, squinting at the unfolding scene like he wasn't sure whether to interfere or start recording. Dad's voice cut across the tension like a knife through damp cloth. "Lauren, what the hell is this?" I turned toward him slowly, made sure I met his eyes, and then stepped down onto the curb where the Mustang's front wheels had just lifted from the pavement. Franklin continued his work without hesitation. "It's parked on my lot," I said, calm and even. "I own the land. The car's being stored without authorization." Katie's mouth opened and closed twice before she found words. "You can't be serious." I pulled a folded copy of the deed from my coat pocket, held it out toward Dad, but he didn't take it. He just stared at me, his mouth tightening into a grim line. You've had that lot all this time? I nodded. 3 years, bought it from the city, paid taxes on it. It's mine legally. The car's trespassing. You could have said something, he snapped, eyes narrowing, tone harder now, laced with that disappointed edge I knew too well. You didn't have to do it like this. And you didn't have to give away something you promised me since I was a kid, I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. But here we are. Katie stepped forward, rage blooming across her face in a flush that clashed with the pale pink of her cardigan. You're doing this to spite me? Over a car? No, I said. I'm doing it to remind you that not everything gets handed to you. Some things are earned. And some things come with consequences when you take them like they were yours to begin with. Dad looked like he wanted to say something, probably something righteous, something fatherly and wise. But he didn't. He just turned and walked back into the house, the door swinging shut behind him with more force than necessary. Brent, sensing danger, retreated as well, muttering something to Katie and tugging the toddler along. Katie stared at me for another long moment, then took a step forward, lowering her voice. You really think this makes you the bigger person? No, I said. It just makes me someone who finally decided to stop being small for your comfort. With that, I turned back to Franklin, who gave me a slight nod as the rear wheels lifted, the car fully secured. I signed the final receipt with a calm hand and watched as the Mustang, still flawless and untouched, rolled into the enclosed trailer like a queen being taken from a palace that no longer deserved her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't cry, either. There was no dramatic music, no applause, no victory, just the sound of a heavy engine idling, then fading into the distance as the trailer pulled away, taking with it not just a car, but the last piece of a promise that had already died long ago. Inside the house, no one spoke to me. Katie sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, phone in hand, thumbs trembling slightly as she typed out a storm of messages to someone who would surely hear a very different version of the story. Dad stood at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug over and over, eyes fixed out the window like he could somehow reverse what just happened with enough silent brooding. I took my coat from the hook by the door, slung it over my arm, and looked at them one last time. You should have known better than to assume I'd just swallow it, I said quietly, not expecting anyone to respond. And they didn't. The silence in that room wasn't the kind that comes from shock or confusion. It was the kind that comes when something real gets exposed, something raw and uncomfortable. It wasn't about a car anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about being seen, being remembered, being accounted for. I stepped outside again, the door clicking shut behind me, and walked to my car. It wasn't classic or glamorous, or even particularly clean, but it was mine. Paid for in full, driven with purpose. No one ever handed it to me, and somehow that made it mean more than any set of polished keys thrown across a brunch table like a party favor. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there I needed to see. In the days that followed the tow truck's quiet departure, the silence from my family became its own kind of sound, a persistent humming absence that rang louder than any raised voice ever could. No one called, no one texted, no one asked where the car had gone, though I knew damn well they were all wondering, whispering, speculating behind closed doors, and through carefully worded group messages I was no longer part of. Katie, as expected, took to social media, posting a filtered photo of her holding the Mustang's keys, paired with a long, emotionally vague caption about betrayal, lessons, and boundaries within family, the kind of post designed not to communicate but to manipulate, fishing for sympathy from people who didn't know the first thing about what had actually happened. Her friends flooded the comments with supportive hearts and shallow advice. You don't need that kind of negativity. And family can hurt the most, but also heal the fastest. None of which made any difference to me, because I wasn't part of their audience, and I no longer cared to be. What they didn't know, and what I had no intention of telling them, was that the Mustang wasn't sitting in my garage. or even tucked away in some secret private storage space, waiting for me to gloat over it in solitude. I hadn't reclaimed it for revenge, not really. That would have been too small, too temporary. Revenge, in the end, is a flash of heat that always burns out faster than you expect. I was never after flames. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was recognition, and failing that, release. 3 days after the incident, I stood in the lot of the local vocational auto school, watching 2 instructors and 4 gawky teenage boys circle the Mustang like it was an artifact from another century. Their excitement was pure, unfiltered, the kind of awe you rarely see in adults who've been taught to hide their feelings behind smirks and sarcasm. The instructors examined the engine with the reverence of surgeons preparing for delicate work, their hands cautious but eager, their voices low with respect. The school didn't have a fancy program or big corporate sponsors. It was barely scraping by, held together by the efforts of one deeply committed director and a group of underpaid teachers who believed in second chances and learning through grease. When I'd called them the day before, offering to donate a classic car in perfect condition, no strings attached, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the man simply said, "You're serious?" And I said, "Completely." I didn't give them my last name. I didn't tell them where the car had come from or what it had meant to me. I simply handed them the keys and signed the paperwork, transferring ownership to the school trust. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet weight of letting go. As I stood there, watching them prep the car for its first round of instructional teardown, an exercise in studying the mechanics before beginning repairs, I felt a strange mixture of grief and freedom settle in my chest. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from getting what you want, but from finally realizing you no longer need it. People often mistake objects for proof of love, thinking if they just hold on to the right heirloom or inherit the right piece of history, they'll finally feel validated. I used to believe that too. I used to think the Mustang was a symbol of my father's affection, that every oil change and late-night garage session was a brick in the foundation of something sacred between us. But in the end, the truth was less romantic. The car had become a stage prop in a family drama that never really had a lead role for me. I was always just backstage, holding the lights, making sure the scenes played out without a hitch, and waiting for someone to finally say, "You deserve to take a bow too." That moment never came, so I created one for myself. I didn't tell anyone about the donation, not because I wanted it to be a secret, but because I didn't need it to be known. That was the difference. The old me, the one who handed over rent money without being asked, who showed up to every family birthday with thoughtful gifts and polite smiles, who swallowed disappointment like it was her job, would have needed someone to acknowledge her gesture. She would have waited for Dad to apologize, for Katie to see the depth of what she'd ignored, for someone to tell her she mattered as much as anyone else in the room. But the woman who walked away from that school parking lot, hands empty and heart quiet, didn't wait for anything. She simply turned toward her car, started the engine, and drove home without checking her phone. That night, I sat on my back porch, wrapped in a sweater that smelled faintly of campfire smoke and old memories. The air was crisp, and the stars were out, scattered like punctuation marks in a sentence I was only just beginning to understand. I thought about my dad. Not with anger, but with the dull ache of someone who has finally accepted that some people can love you and still never truly see you. I thought about Katie, her world built on spotlights and applause, and how exhausting it must be to always need to be adored. And I thought about myself, alone, quiet, but not small. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, then it rang again, and again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. It was Dad. His voice was cautious, as if he didn't quite know how to start. "I heard from someone at the school. They said you gave them the Mustang." I said nothing at first. Then I replied, "I thought it should be appreciated." There was a pause long enough for me to hear his breath catch. "You know I never meant to hurt you, right?" Another pause. Then I asked him the only question that still mattered. Then why did you? He didn't answer, and maybe he never will. But maybe that's not the point anymore. Somewhere out there in a brightly lit garage filled with the sound of socket wrenches and the laughter of kids who are just beginning to understand how engines work, a red '69 Mustang sits with its hood open, waiting to teach someone something valuable. Maybe that's the closest thing to justice I'll ever get. Maybe that's enough. The car was never the point. It was just the spark. And I've always known how to build a fire.